Funding for This Is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Amazon, proud sponsor of WPLN's daily show, This Is Nashville, engaging our differences so we can discover our unity. More on Amazon's community work at aboutamazon.com.
I'm Khalil Colonna, and this is Nashville. Our state consistently ranks among the worst in the nation for maternal mortality. The Tennessee Department of Health reported that in 2021, the most recent year we have data for, 53 women died from pregnancy-related deaths. The three leading causes of deaths that year were COVID-19, cardiovascular disease, and substance use disorder. And Black women died at twice the rate of white women. The Department of Health found that 80% of all these deaths were preventable and has made specific recommendations to help address the leading causes from that year as well as from the last 5 years. But it's not just moms that are at risk here in Tennessee. In 2021, 505 babies died in Tennessee. Data from the National Center for Health Statistics reveals that while the infant mortality rate here has decreased over the last 5 years, it is still higher than the national average. And there are significant discrepancies in outcomes for babies born to Black moms in our state. One option available to help are doulas. Doulas offer information, emotional support, and help through the huge life experience of having a child and becoming pregnant. The help is proven to make a difference. Recent research from the National Library of Medicine has found that doula support is linked to better birth outcomes. One woman aware of the power of support is Kristin Mejia. She is dedicated to making a difference for Black women and families here in Tennessee, and 5 years ago, she founded Homeland Heart Birth and Wellness Collective. The organization offers education and increases the number of doulas locally to improve birth outcomes for women, infants, and families of color. We're grateful to have her here with us today to hear more about her work and her personal experience. Kristin, it's been a minute since you've been on the show. Welcome back to This Is Nashville.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate it. I appreciate you being here. Okay, so you're someone who started an organization specifically to help Black women and families in pregnancy through the first months of a newborn's life. Tell me this. What does it mean to you to hear these statistics here in Tennessee that I spouted off, and I'm sure you're very familiar with? What does it mean to you when you hear these and know how it affects Black moms and babies and the fact that they're dying at higher rates than other groups?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind when I hear these statistics is the fact that it's 2024 and this is the United States of America. There's a lot that we can do, you know, like as far as capabilities and technology and the evolution of all the things. I have this conversation with people all the time, but one of my favorite things to remind people of is that we currently have vehicles that can drive themselves.
Yeah.
But there are people in the world, in America, in Tennessee specifically, right here in our backyard, that will go to a high-level facility to have a baby and won't come out of it. That we all should be embarrassed. All of us. Black, white, purple, green, red. We all should be embarrassed that as a nation, we can use our ink to write this on paper.
And we choose not to.
We've got a lot of eyes that are looking other places, I think, and not even really other places, but almost like just pretending that we're not seeing the problem. I think that, again, in a world where we have cars that can drive themselves, there's no excuse. At this point, there really is no excuse why we're seeing the significant disparities more than anything that we're seeing. Like, do I want more white women or other women to be dying at the same rates as Black women? Absolutely not. I think that, you know, we should be more so looking for in a situation where we have Black women that are dying at lower rates, you know, similar to white women. But the disparities are, you know, the biggest part of the embarrassment. That those things are, as you mentioned in the statistics, 80% preventable. Like, that's over 50%, which means it sounds like we're just not trying.
Is it, do you think it may be because as a nation, we really don't think about pregnancy and childbirth? We kind of ignore it. And most people think about it when someone may be pregnant or having a baby. I got to get a gift, or I myself is like, oh, snap, we're pregnant. We got to kick into gear and do something. Do you think it's because, it's kind of similar to reproductive rights? We don't pay attention to it often.
Yes, I think that, and saying that we don't pay attention to it is also weird. It's almost like an oxymoron, because we do. We pay a lot of attention to it, right? Because we spend a lot of time taking people's reproductive rights away. So yeah, we're paying attention to it. We're just on the wrong side of the argument. We treat pregnancy as a siloed event in people's lives, right? Okay, follow me here, because it's a lot. So we treat pregnancy as a siloed event in people's lives. However, we see this siloed event almost as like a life requirement, right? Which is why we're passing the laws and making the requirements that we're making with regard to reproductive health care, right? We're almost forcing people to have babies, right? So we look at people, if we're, talking in gendered language, we look at women and we say, hey, you're a woman, you're going to have a baby. So that's a big umbrella. However, we also say we're not going to talk to you about it until you actually get pregnant. It's a big deal. It's a really big deal. And we want you to do it. We need you to do it. But we're not going to inform you about it until it actually happens. So in Tennessee alone, right, the education system is set in an abstinence-only space. So there is not reproductive education that's happening. It almost comes from the back end just to say, hey, it's almost like a threatening curriculum. Like, if you do this thing, this horrible thing could happen. It's not informative. We're not talking to people. We're not talking to teenagers about how babies are made, because we don't want to talk to teenagers about sex.
Nah,
right?
Which is how they're made.
If we talk to teenagers about sex, they might do it. But here's the secret. If we don't talk to them about sex, they might do it.
I can tell you they're going to do it. I was a high school teacher for quite some time.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you look at it that way, we have to put a safety mechanism in place. And the safety mechanism is to just talk to them about it. So now, once someone has started their menstrual cycle, and like, even then, there are girls that don't realize that, like, that's the moment. Like, now you can have a baby. Your body will make a baby. So we're so busy hiding this thing, and we don't want to talk to girls about it. Everybody's embarrassed to talk about it. We don't want to talk about it in front of boys. Like, maybe that's why we're not talking about periods in school. I don't know. But, like, you need to know about a period just like I need to know about a period. Just because it may not happen to your body doesn't mean you don't need to know what's going on, right? So again, these are all these things that are seemingly so taboo in our society to talk about, but they're extremely important if we are going to tell people they have to have babies.
It's interesting to me because there are certain political points of view now that suggest that to continue talking in gendered language, women should have babies.
Yeah.
Yet it seems to be a little bit of a contradiction or a dichotomy or a confusion in not wanting to talk about how babies are coming, how you're to prepare yourself to have a baby, all of the things that are required, particularly the medical risks. I find that interesting. And, you started Homeland Heart 5 years ago. Is that what you've recognized, what we just discussed? Is that a little bit about why you started the organization?
Absolutely. Mostly because what I recognized was that the things that we see on the report that are preventable are things that actually are pretty easy for people to take into their own hands, right? So we talk about cardiomyopathies as being the second leading cause of death in postpartum period.
Can you explain what that is?
Yes. So anytime you hear cardio as a prefix, we're talking about the heart. And then myopathy is a disease or kind of problem with the heart. And so what we are recognizing is that more often in the postpartum period, and I in my opinion, it's because we have a baby, and once the baby is out, we hyper monitor the pregnancy, and then once the baby is out, we're like, all right, see ya, got your baby, good job. And as doulas and in our organization, we're telling women all the time, like, you're not in the clear. Like, this is not the end. You having a baby in your arms is fantastic. I'm so glad that happened, but we're not done here.
Okay.
Right. And so I think that we lose sight. What happens is we lose sight of what is still happening to the body as it is trying to heal from this major event. And the heart is having to do a lot of work to make sure that the blood is circulating properly. I mean, the same way in everyday life, but you also have just expelled a lot of blood because you just had a baby. And, you know, even in a non-complicated delivery, there can still be some amount of blood. And so your body has to replenish that. It's quite a bit of work. If you're a breastfeeding mom, there's a lot of work that your body is doing, and your heart is working, eating the right foods, making sure you're taking the right vitamins, continuing to take your prenatal vitamin. These things are extremely important when we talk about how do we take care of your heart during and after pregnancy. Exercise is so cliche. It's so, you know, we're like, just exercise. But really, but I also think if we go back to middle school education, what was PE? PE was us playing.
Yeah.
Like, oh, yeah, we're going to go play. I learned very little about what was going on with my body in PE. Like, I wasn't educated on my physical in PE. We got to go play, and that was fantastic. But now that I'm an adult and I don't understand cardiomyopathies or what a pulmonary embolism is, or, you know, just all of these things, is like, why were we playing dodgeball? Like, what is that? Why were we doing that? Especially, again, follow me, if we knew we were going to want this person to have a baby 18 years down the line, why weren't we talking to her about that instead of letting someone throw a dodgeball at her abdomen repeatedly? Right? It's like, come on. If we just start from the beginning and think all the way to the end, like, a baby is born and we think, okay, in 30 years, we're going to want this person to have a baby. How do we make sure that that's healthy?
Okay. I understand where you're coming from. Tell me this. Is that why within the organization, within Homeland Heart, you set it out to train doulas, specifically African-American Black doulas here?
Absolutely. So I have 2 children of my own, a son and a daughter. And it was my son that exposed me to the birthing process, obviously, and just the whole healthcare system with regard to pregnancy. And then it was my daughter that really opened my eyes to the maternal mortality issue, because I kind of was like inspired in this sense of, I'm putting a woman into the world who, right? I'm putting this woman into the world who in 30 years may want to have a baby. And so what is that going to look like? And what I know is that the maternal mortality rates that we see now are worse than they were 30 years ago.
Really?
So what do I do? What can I do, and how do I do it? And so the more that I looked into or read about the maternal mortality crisis and how it was evolving, and it just seemed to be like a big boom of information a couple of years ago, I came up with the thought that if we understood doulas to be an effective measure to change the outcome, then why isn't it something that's standardized? Like, if we know that a flu shot can keep you from getting the flu, right? And we live in a society where we almost require people to get flu shots during school season, you know, like that whole thing, then why wouldn't we do the same thing here? If we are saying we have a mortality problem and then we have the data that says, oh, wait, this can fix it, then it would stand to reason that the next step is to just implement that so that we fix it. And that seems to be where America's stuck.
It's interesting because childbirth is the only way to keep the species going. as far as I know. I mean, there may be some new technologies out there that they're working on, but it's the good old fashioned way to get more people.
Right.
All right. So break it down for us, because we may have listeners who don't know. What is a doula?
So the definition of doulas have evolved over time, like even in the past couple of years. But at the standard foundational level, a doula is someone who supports a family and a birthing person through their pregnancy and postpartum journey, what we call the perinatal journey. So it's pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. Doulas come in all specialties, lots of different specialties. And at Homeland Heart, we specifically train what are called community-based doulas. The difference between a community-based doula and what others may call like a professional doula or certified doula, rather, is that community-based doulas are most likely going to be living and working and functioning within the community of people that they serve. So there is a relational aspect there when we connect someone with a client and they have the same zip code, and this client is a first-time parent and they need help finding a pediatrician, and this doula has kids and says, hey, this is the pediatrician that we go to. We love them, been going there for 10 years, whatever. Those types of things help to build the trust that is missing, especially when it comes to the Black community, between community and corporate healthcare, right? There's a lot of trust that is missing between communities of color and hospitals and doctors and the healthcare industry. And so when you're able to pull in community-based providers, community health workers, such as doulas, there's a bridge there that fills that gap to say, you know, we're okay, we understand the speculation that you may have, but we also have a different understanding of the healthcare system, and we can help the two of you understand each other.
Now, doulas don't have medical training, do they?
Not particularly, no. Doulas are encouraged to learn a little about a lot. Mm-hmm. So it's important for us to be able to, we say almost that doulas are like translators. So it's important for us to be able to explain it to our client. A lot of times there is an air of authority that is in the room when you go see your doctor. And so we find that especially during pregnancy, people sit in the room with their doctor and they're just nodding their head like, okay. And then they call their doula. This is what the doctor said. I don't understand.
Gotcha.
Right. And so we say, okay, well, you know, based on where you are in your pregnancy, what's the information you were given? What does that mean? How does that, what does that mean in relationship to the rest of your pregnancy? How do we handle it? And how do you ask questions about it next time?
7 years ago, I dated a woman who was training to be a doula. And one thing that they really did was help with emotion, the emotional experience of childbirth, about to be a parent, particularly for first-time parents. I saw them do a lot of work with the fathers as well. Is that something you all focus on? It
is. So we actually have a community partner that we work with that runs a fatherhood boot camp that we refer our dads to. Dr. Robert Taylor is a professor over at Mejia, and he started a fatherhood boot camp program as he is the father of, I believe, 7 children. So he spends his Saturdays working with expectant fathers on some of the basics of like how to change a diaper and how to swaddle a baby. And then when you talk about emotions, like what happens when the baby's just crying its eyes out and you don't know what to do. You picked it up, you swaddled it, you changed its diaper, you fed it, you did all the things, and it's still crying. I think what we come into, and also what I learned in my journey of a parent, is that sometimes it's seemingly understood that women just automatically know what to do, and the baby will automatically take to mom. So you have a baby that's just crying inconsolably, the dad will pick it up and he's like, well, I mean, it won't stop crying. You got to do it because it wants you.
Yeah.
Most times that's not really the case. And so I think, of course, I haven't sat in the fatherhood program, but I think that a part of what he does too is help you understand that babies are not to take that personally. It's not like the baby doesn't like the dad.
The baby's not dissing you, daddy.
Exactly. One of the reasons we found it important to start to focus on fathers, first of all, is due to the statistics that we see with regard to Black fathers and the absence thereof. And we know that to be quite the opposite, right? The other part of it is that another statistic that I found while going down a rabbit hole that is not included in our state mortality statistics is that for Black women, intimate partner violence is the second leading cause of death in the postpartum period. And so it made me want to talk more to male partners to find out what the emotions are that they're either suppressing or, I don't know, feeling during the prenatal period that then come out uncontrollably on the back end, right? While I absolutely do not condone domestic violence, I think that in these cases, the conversation should shift a little bit. And while the victim is a very important part of the domestic violence piece, there are a lot of hormones and there are a lot of things that are happening during a pregnancy for both people that are involved that honestly, there's not even enough time to address, but we're not spending the time to address it. So again, while that is not anything that I'm condoning, I also have the thought that maybe we're not spending enough time preparing him and talking to him about proper expectations. And that's how we're ending up here on the back end.
It's definitely something to look at. But one more question before we go to break. You're about to sit for your certification exam to become a certified professional midwife. Can you explain us the difference between a doula and a midwife?
Yeah. So the Cliff's Notes version is doulas are outside and midwives are inside.
Okay.
And so midwives are most closely related to OBGYNs as far as the fact that we are the ones who are doing the delivery and the prenatal care and all those things.
Okay, time out. You mean inside the body?
Inside the body.
Okay,
yeah,
with you.
Sorry.
Okay, thank you. No, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yes.
I thought so, but you cleared it up for me. Please continue.
Yes, doulas are outside the body, midwives inside the body. And then, depending on what midwife you talk to, we're also not very inside the body. This country was built on midwifery care. There are stories of the granny midwives and grand midwives from, way, way back when, and, who was delivering the babies on plantations and then who was delivering babies when Black people weren't even able to go to hospitals because that was a thing. And then what happened when, it's if we really think about it, it's not really hard to figure out, what is a midwife? It's that we live in a system that has done a really good job of phasing that industry out so that it could be placed into one that is more lucrative.
I can imagine that also not just in Black communities, but in rural white communities, midwifery was huge as well.
Absolutely, and still is.
All right, we're going to take one quick break. When we return, we'll continue our conversation with Kristin Mejia to learn more about her personal experience into parenthood and her work. Stay with us. This is Nashville.
Funding for This is Nashville comes from you, our listeners, and Music City Prep Clinic, Nashville-based provider for PrEP, and offering comprehensive sexual health services in an environment designed to be safe, professional, and shame-free. Learn more at musiccityprep.org.
I'm Khalil Ekalona, and this is Nashville. Today, we're speaking with Kristin Mejia, founder and CEO of Homeland Heart Birth and Wellness Collective. Homeland Heart helps train doulas as well as offer a variety of services to help moms and families of color during pregnancy, labor, and delivery, and the first weeks and months of a newborn's life. Kristin, so good for you to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
You have two kids. You mentioned before, a son and a daughter, and you are very, very involved in birth work by helping others. I do want to hear about your story. Tell me what your journey looked into becoming a mom. What did that look like, particularly with your first child, your son?
Yes. Okay, so my journey into parenthood was actually a surprise one. I got pregnant with my son on birth control in 2013, 2014.
That's not uncommon.
It's not. No, unfortunately, it's not.
I've got 5 siblings, and all of us are birth control kids.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
We got to work on that birth control thing. No, so yeah, my son is a birth control baby, and I will say that like I absolutely believe that like he has a bigger purpose. Like I also kind of sit in that place too. Like, oh, you must have really needed to be here for some reason. So I got pregnant on birth control, and it was a pretty emotional roller coaster because I never wanted to be a mom. So I just wasn't the girl that sat around dreaming about a husband and kids and all the rest of that. And I had the day I found out that I was pregnant, I had just applied to graduate school to be a speech pathologist.
Wow.
So it was quite devastating. Following that, my pregnancy was very rough. I was very sick. I had HG, which is hyperemesis gravidarum, and it is a dehydration issue. It's a hydration issue, and so I spent a lot of time vomiting and then going to the hospital and having to be pumped full of fluids to be hydrated. It just wasn't fun, and I can remember a lot of times being like, this is why I never wanted to do this. And then I had him, and that was a pretty swift situation. I mean, I chose to have an unmedicated birth. I didn't know anything about doulas or midwives when I got pregnant, and I almost kind of chose to be uninformed, which sounds terrible, but I joked that like I spent probably about 6 or 7 months in delusion, like I cannot believe this is happening to me, so I'm actually not even going to believe it's happening to me. We're just going to pretend we're not having a baby.
And as your stomach
right,
grows.
it's all right here, right.
Yeah.
And I was going to prenatal care. I wasn't ignoring it completely, but I was really trying not to give my attention to it. My delivery, however, was very empowering, and I remember coming out of it thinking like, wow, I didn't know I could be so strong. And so that was what it was. My son breastfed with ease, and I had some issues, but I had support. My grandmother came up from out of town. I had family come up from out of town. My mom was off work for 4 weeks. My kid's dad was off work for 4 weeks. So I was surrounded by people. I had a lot of support and still found myself spiraling into postpartum mood disorders. In my mind, I thought, like, how could this happen? I have so many people around me to like help me with the baby. But then on the second thought, I remember thinking that like, of course this would happen because I never wanted to have a baby in the first place. And so I didn't want a baby in the first place, and it was doing all of the baby things, like making me exhausted and all the things. And then I remember on week 4, on the same Monday, everyone dispersed from the house. So my grandmother went back home to Atlanta, my mom went back to work, and my partner at the time went back to work. And so it was just me and my baby in the house. And I remember us both sitting there crying.
Wow.
And then my daughter came along, and in between the time of my son and daughter, I became pretty well versed in breastfeeding and started a public campaign to help empower Black women to breastfeed.
Okay, so let me ask you about this. You didn't want a child. You kind of acted
I get this all the time.
Okay, you're like, okay, I don't want to have a kid. I'm living my life. Oh, snap. I'm going to graduate school. Actually, no, I'm pregnant. I'm going to live my life and do everything as far as prenatal care that I have to do to make sure that this child is given every advantage of being healthy when it's born. However, I'm not going to be fazed by it. You have the baby. You start going through postpartum troubles and difficulty, yet you have support. So that is one thing where you would think most of the time, I think it maybe I'm ignorant on this, but we would assume that a woman has a big child and she's going through postpartum difficulty, she doesn't have that much support. But you did have a lot of support for a lot longer than most people have. 1 month is a long time. Look, we have got politicians now fighting whether or not people can get a month or 2 weeks off even to take care of a brand new child and their families. Yet you're still going through all of this. But at the same time, you're studying up on breastfeeding. You start to learn. This is the initiation into your journey to be right here where you are now. What was growing in you? What were your emotions like during that time where you're like, I'm not sure if I'm ready to be a mom, but here I am about to learn everything possible about the process of birth and being a mother?
I remember being very upset about how inconvenient this country makes parenting. And I think this is probably the first time that has like hit me so clearly that it really is that. Like, there are a lot of reasons why I started Homeland Heart, but ultimately, how can we live in a place that needs families so badly? We need people to keep being here, yet we make it so inconvenient to even enjoy it, right? When moms talk about, or anyone talks about, oh, the baby won't stop crying, and, you know, just like the initiation of parenting, we have literally normalized how miserable it can be to be a parent. And it's like, or we could just put other things in place so that it's not so miserable, and then maybe people would voluntarily have babies. Maybe we wouldn't have to.
And the costs of it, I remember listening to an NPR report in 2008 when I lived in Los Angeles, and it was about how the mega wealthy in the upper Northeast part of the country were expressing their wealth not by buying cars, not by buying another mansion, but by having children. So talk to me. You had your daughter after a while, after having your son. You had this different point in life. You've learned a lot more. How did you feel? You said a little bit about really stepping up because you were recognizing that you were bringing another human in the world who was eventually going to potentially bring in more humans in the world if she chooses to. How did your feelings on parenthood, motherhood, giving birth change when you first held your daughter?
It was scary. I felt a different fear, and I don't really like to call that in, but it's important to recognize. I felt a different fear with her than I did with my son. My son was born in 2014, and it was just before, I think, an explosion of like police brutality against Black men and that thing. So bringing him into the world wasn't scary, but once he was here, I was like, oh my God, what have I done? But I had already heard about, and I'd already known about the Black maternal mortality crisis and the things that we were experiencing when I was pregnant with my daughter. And so it was important for me, even though, not to go into this with a big cloud of fear, to understand that I'm bringing someone into the world who, like you said, will potentially make this choice for herself. And the climate for success of it is awful. And as a parent, it's my job to protect my children as much as I can and to control as much of their experience or their environment, their protection as I can. And maybe I'm thinking of it on too much of a grand scheme of things. And, most of us are like, what school do I put my kid in? And I'm like, oh my God, she might want to have a baby. And so why, if 20 years from now, it's still not safe to have a baby in this country, like, what are we doing? And it also made me start thinking about my son's experience, right? Like, sure, a baby's not going to come out of his body, maybe, I don't know, whatever. But if he so chooses to go down this lane of parenthood, may have this experience. And unfortunately, I have worked with a couple of dads who have been in a less than optimal circumstance with regard to childbirth. And I don't want to have to hold my son's hand through the loss of his child's mother one day because we just can't get this right.
If you're just tuning in, this is Nashville, and I'm your host, Khalil Ekolona. We're talking this hour with Kristin Mejia, doula and founder and CEO of Homeland Heart, Birth, and Wellness Collective. What do you really love about being a parent?
That's a very interesting question.
Like, what moments are your favorite?
So my kids just started school on Monday. They just went back to school on Monday.
I know that's a favorite day for my mother.
So like not like
and
that
her
though.
friends would have cocktails on the first day of school.
We did.
Yeah.
But it wasn't that, right? Like, yeah, I'm excited. Okay, summer's over. They're going back to school. Phew, I can work. But after I took their picture, like my immediate thought was like the pictures before every year on their first day of school, you know. And so I look at all these pictures and I tell people that I work with now, one of the things we don't talk about when we talk about parenthood, we're always talking about how hard it is in a sense of like, oh, it's so hard, babies cry, blah, blah, blah. But it's really hard to watch your children grow up. It is one of my favorite things to do because I also understand that there is an extreme blessing in the way that I'm able to watch my children grow. I'm an entrepreneur. My schedule is kind of as flexible as I want it to be. I can, stop my day for a field trip. I can experience their first day of school with them. Those things are the more enjoyable moments of parenting. And then also understanding, I think seeing them as a mirror of me too is not always very enjoyable, but it's an interesting way to, as an adult, to learn yourself.
Do you talk to your kids about the work you're doing at Homeland Heart?
Oh, absolutely. My son will tell you all day long that my mom delivers babies. My mom's a midwife. They know. The funny thing is they know a lot about it because for safety reasons, actually. So we hang out in the city. I take them a lot of places, and before we get out of the car, we always have the speech like, if you go missing or if you can't find me, if you whatever, right? I am able to tell them now, if you get lost, have someone Google Homeland Heart, and they can call me because they know my logo, they recognize whatever. So I always tell them like, have someone Google or Instagram Homeland Heart. And my phone number is, the office phone number is there, and they can call me or whatever. So they know. They also are like my little postpartum visit buddies. And so lots of my clients have met my children. And this is community care, right? Okay. We tell people that all the time. The majority of my doulas have children. My entire staff has children. We're a mighty team of 4, administratively. And between us, I think there's 12 kids. And so we're moms, and we get it. And we know that there's a lot that goes along with this. I think that it's really important that our clients understand that in order for me to do this work and still be a great mom, every now and then it means that I got to bring them with me. And if I can't bring my kids with me, then I'm probably not the midwife for you.
I want to get into how you went from being a mom unexpectedly to being a doula, training midwife, and starting Homeland Heart. We're going to take this short break. All right, when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with Kristin Mejia. Stay with us. This is Nashville. I'm Khalil Ekolona, and this is Nashville. Welcome back to the show. Today we are talking with Kristin Mejia, who started and now runs Homeland Heart Collective Wellness. It's a nonprofit that trains doulas and provides support for women and their families here in Middle Tennessee who face higher risks of pregnancy-related deaths and infant mortality. The focus is on Black and African American women. Again, Kristin, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you.
All right, so how did you find your way into birth work?
So I I kind of rolled into it by way of breastfeeding. Once I started breastfeeding my son, and I didn't realize how much I didn't know about just like having a kid and being a mom, and it's interesting. Like we talked about before, like we really don't know how much we don't know, even though we float through the world like, oh, I'm gonna have a baby one day, but we just have no idea what it all is. I think that it all just kind of like took me by surprise that, I don't know, like I
did magically one thing come from another place and just led you here? Was it a natural sense of curiosity and everything you learned about breastfeeding that kind of led you here?
I think that's a good way to put it. Sorry, I had to like just kind of
It's all right.
pause, get my emotions together.
Yeah, that's okay.
Because I can remember just crying so many tears in the beginning. Like, I just don't want to do this, through breastfeeding sessions, through like breastfeeding my kid, crying. Like, why am I doing this? But knowing that it was the best thing to do for him. Mm-hmm. And that motivated me to publicize it. And so this was like we're seeing a lot of increase in social media. I think just as far as like people's transparency and the way people shared. Like I said, my son was born in 2014. So I think, just seeing what people get more comfortable on the internet in general. I started seeing in a group that I was in a lot of things about people who are not being supported in their breastfeeding journey. And they're more specifically Black women. And I had the experience of seeing someone breastfeed in my lifetime. Like, I'd seen it before. But it was in this group that I realized that people had never seen people breastfeed, or like they were the first people to breastfeed in their families. And I'm a 4th generation breastfeeder. Okay. So like that didn't make any sense to me. I'm like, wait, what? Nobody in your family breastfed? Okay, that's very interesting. And then more and more I found out more statistics about what not breastfeeding did for Black women, as far as the statistics regarding breast cancer, and the fact that though white women are more highly diagnosed with breast cancer, Black women are more likely to die from it because of treatments that are ineffective. And the easiest way to prevent it is through breastfeeding. And so that's how I became a breastfeeding advocate. Like, well, we need to breastfeed. And the really funny thing is, I became a breast cancer advocate when I was young because my birthday's in October.
Okay.
So when I found out Breast Cancer Awareness Month was October, I was like, oh, that's my month. So oddly enough, I've always just kind of latched on to breast cancer awareness. So it kind of rolled through that. The more people saw me breastfeed, I would just, every time I was somewhere publicly, I would post a picture of me breastfeeding my son, and there was not any covering involved or any, there was a summer, I want to say it was 2015, maybe 2016, where women were getting like kicked out of community pools, and there was some big explosive thing that went down at Target where this man was talking crazy to a woman that was breastfeeding in Target. It was a weird breastfeeding in public summer. And that is what inspired me to do this campaign. I'm just going to put a picture of me up breastfeeding everywhere to encourage women to do it. That rolled into me then almost being approached as a counselor. People would start asking me questions about breastfeeding. Can you help me with this? Can you help me with that? And then I found out that it was a job. Like, oh, I could get paid for teaching people about this. And I only rolled into it because it was easy for me. It wasn't like it was hard for me and I had to learn about it. It was that I had my kid. I intentionally did not learn about breastfeeding, and he did it on his own. And we were successful. I breastfed my son for 3 years. And so, it makes me think about purpose and how, like I said, I didn't do that. If I was going to credit my success of breastfeeding to anything, it would be him. And so that is what encouraged or, inspired me to help more women in the community realize, like, it's not breastfeeding that's hard. It's the emotion that comes along with it. It's the lack of support sometimes that comes along with it. Like, sure enough, there are some physical aspects of it that are difficult to get past, but I understood that a lot of times we were quitting breastfeeding or giving up on it due to lack of social supports. That rolled me into birth and the postpartum experience, and what I started to realize that people were not receiving. And I didn't understand too much about birth until I became a doula. I became a doula because I was having baby fever and I didn't really want to have another baby. I just wanted to cuddle one.
How real is baby fever?
It's very real. It hit when my son turned 1 because he grew out of clothing. That was the first time that I did this big batch of clothing removal from his room. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's not a baby anymore. We just leveled up. And so it hits kind of at different moments like that.
Does it hit all women?
No, absolutely not.
Okay.
No, it doesn't hit all women, and it also fades away. You could not pay me to have baby fever now.
Okay.
And that's why I think now is a safe time for me to go into delivering babies, because it doesn't make me want one every time I have one in my arms. Yeah. So breastfeeding is what really kicked the door open into birth work, and then I got into doulaing because I wanted to hold babies more. And then after I had an experience doulaing for a non-Black family and partnered with learning about the statistics of Black women in maternal mortality, that was when I made the decision to specifically work with the Black community. I had seen the difference between the way the doctors treat white women and the way doctors treat Black women. And while it at times is not some open, significant, aggressive circumstance, microaggressions are just as aggressive. And when you see them very clearly in your face, it's really hard for me to ignore it. And so I felt like this is not a community or population that really needs my assistance in safely making it through childbirth. So I need to focus my efforts here.
And I can imagine microaggressions are even more powerful when one is about to have a child or potentially going through the process of childbirth. Everything is sensitive. I was there when my nephew was born, so I understand. I was in the room. I understand what it's like. Okay, 2 quick questions I want to ask you. I only have a little bit of time left. Your advocacy. You've been involved in state advocacy for a few years now, and you're working with partners to help get doula care, I understand, covered by Medicaid. What are you hoping to have happen there?
I hope that by spending the past 5 years focusing on a population that is extremely vulnerable and in need of this type of support, that we have been able to create and provide enough data to show that where this type of change can help everyone. And so what we're looking for, there are currently 8 other states whose Medicaid systems support reimbursement of doula care. Doulas are valuable in this system that we work in. Oftentimes when we're working with vulnerable populations that really need our support, though, we're working with people who can't afford the value, the dollar amount that we put. On average, to hire just a birth doula is going to cost you about $2,000. When we're talking about Medicaid populations, we're talking primarily about low-income communities and people who have a lot of, some significant financial barriers. And so we're almost neglecting to provide necessary care to people by not offering or not ensuring that their insurance policy can cover the things that they need. And then also by making sure we're financially supporting and compensating community health workers and doulas properly.
So what do you want people listening to know about how they can find the right support if they or a loved one is pregnant or if they have a newborn?
I want everyone to know that these things are real supports that are available, and that regardless of color, these things can happen to anyone. So you gave us some statistics at the beginning of the show. And while we do see some of these horrible outcomes happening most to communities of color, white women are not exempt, right? And so understanding that the maternal mortality crisis is not a Black maternal mortality crisis. It's an American maternal mortality crisis, and we all can do something about it. And that is, as a pregnant woman or as her family member or as a friend, making sure that she's aware that, hey, do you know about doulas? Do you know that this thing exists? Maybe you don't want a birth doula. Maybe you've had 5 babies and nothing ever went wrong and you know all the things, and that's fantastic. But what about postpartum? What about when you come home? Do you need some support there? And it's never too early to get that support. I just talked to a young lady who's 8 weeks pregnant. It's not too soon. The sooner, the better. Pregnancy is a terrible time to have a crash course in reproduction.
Kristin, I'm going to leave it on that. That's probably the best closing line ever on This is Nashville. Kristin Mejia is a doula, a mom, as well as the founder and CEO of Homeland Heart Birth and Wellness Collective. Kristin, thank you for being here. Thank you for dropping science on us all.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a pleasure.
Thanks to you for tuning in this hour. This is Nashville is a production of Nashville Public Radio. Today's episode was produced by Katherine Ceicys, directed by Tasha A.F. Lemley. Our technical director and board operator is Liv Lombardi. The masterminds behind our theme music are Larange and Namir Blade. You can listen back at thisisnashville.org or wherever you get good podcasts. And the conversation doesn't end here. Tweet us at This Is Nashville. Find us on Instagram. Tell us what you want from our show by filling out our quick survey online. You can also call to leave us a message at 615-751-2500. This is Nashville. I'm Kaliole Colonna. We'll see you tomorrow, everybody. And be good to each other.